One simple stumble, a simple moment of weakness, that can be all it can take for an empire to collapse. And this is a recurring theme across many points in history, and indeed it is no different for the first empire in world history. Although China and India would like to dispute that fact, but anyway. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you lads and ladies around the world, and welcome back to Mesopotamia after a long hiatus to tour the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near and Middle East, as well as the various early civilisations across the world during this time. When we last departed from Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire had indeed reached its zenith, stretching from what is now southern Iraq and what is now Kuwait, all the way in the north to southern Anatolia. But just as we were leaving Mesopotamia, a group of people known as the Gutians were beginning to be just a little bit on the naughty side and started smashing up the Akkadian Empire, doing things like releasing herds of animals, neglecting public health and public safety. It was chaos. But how did the first empire in history collapse? Surely a structure, a society as complex as one of the first empires in history compared to other societies at the time couldn't have just simply collapsed overnight. And yes, there is a bit of a lead up to this. For remember what I said at the start of the video about a small stumble can be all it can take for a civilization or an empire to fall? Well, that is pretty much what happened. For after the reigns of 3 successful monarchs at the helm of the first empire in human history, the Akkadian Empire spanned more or less the entire Mesopotamian region, encompassing many of the ancient city-states that had existed long before Sargon of Akkad first picked up a sword, such as Ur, Uruk, and Lagash, and of course the capital of Akkad or Agade further north from these city-states. But as for how the empire itself collapsed, we have 2 possibilities. One of them, although controversial, is the possibility of a drought coming into effect roughly 150 years after Sargon first made his conquests. This would have likely led to a decline in the amount of crops and agricultural goods being produced within the Mesopotamian region, and of course during the Bronze Age, 3,000 long years ago, food scarcity was a much bigger problem than it is today. Of course, it's something we can weather today, just like many storms that the ancient peoples would have faced that would have blown them all over. However, in these times, the availability of food could determine the level of efficiency and stability within which your society or civilization operated. And with a limited amount of food brings many other problems, such as an inability to feed and perhaps even pay an army to hold up the civilization that you are attempting to govern. This brings us to our second potential instigator for the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, that of civil war and the resulting structural instability in government of the state. And one of our best sources for this comes from the Sumerian Kings list, within which it is made evident that civil war and governmental instability perhaps hastened the decline and collapse of the Akkadian Empire, creating a window of opportunity for the Gutians to pour over the Zagros Mountains and bring the final nail in the coffin of the world's first empire. With an excerpt from the Sumerian Kings list perhaps emphasising anxiously the instability that was created by such upheaval. Quote, "Who was king? Who was not king? Irgigi the king, Nanum the king, Imi the king, Ilulu the king. The 4 of them were kings but reigned only 3 years. Dudu reigned 21 years. Shuturul, the the son of Dudu, reigned 15 years. Akkad was defeated and its kingship carried off to Uruk. In Uruk, Ur-Ningin reigned 7 years. Ur-Gigir, son of Ur-Ningin, reigned 6 years. Kuda reigned 6 years. Puzur-Ili reigned 5 years. Ur-Utu reigned 6 years. Uruk was smitten with weapons, and its kingship carried off by the Gutian hordes. Close quote. As we can see from this anxiously written scripture in the Sumerian kings list, each of the kings mentioned within the excerpt I have quoted did not reign for all that long, the longest being Dudu, who reigned for 21 years. And as we can determine from the safety and comfort of the benefit of hindsight, many rulers coming in quick succession and only holding power for a very limited amount of time does not exactly promote a shining image of stability. And of course, in civil war, the apparatus of the state, in all its power and might, gets neglected. And speaking of neglect, the Gutians, once they seized power in the Mesopotamian region, were not much better than the civil warring kings of the last days of the Akkadian Empire, again proven in the Sumerian king list. Quote, "In the Gutian hordes first reigned a nameless king, then Imta reigned 3 years as king, Shulme reigned 6 years, Elulumesh reigned 6 years, Inimbakesh reigned 5 years, Igeshuash reigned 6 years, Iarlagab reigned 15 years, Ibate reigned 3 years, Kurum reigned 1 year, Iararum reigned 2 years, Ibranum reigned 1 year, Hablum reigned 2 years, Puzur-Sin, son of Hablum, reigned 7 years, Iarlaganda reigned 7 years, with a total of 21 kings reigned 91 years and 40 days. Close quote. Now, when quoting this excerpt, I left something quite important out. The fact that many kings, although the amount of time they reigned is listed, their names go unwritten, perhaps suggesting a lack of documentation within the Gutian period of Mesopotamia. And not to mention, 21 kings of the Gutians held control over Mesopotamia in a period just shy of a century. And if you were to work on averages, that's roughly 1 new Gutian king every 4 years, which, if you put it to modern averages, is slightly longer than the lifespan of your average British Prime Minister at the current time. But luckily for the ancient Mesopotamians, in the wake of the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, the Gutian period would of course come to an end after less than a century, thanks to the efforts of the Sumerian king Ur-Nammu, who, if sources are to be believed, in the year 2112 BCE, cleared the Gutians out of Mesopotamia during his reign, ushering in a Mesopotamian renaissance known as the Ur-III period. And this assertion of power by a Sumerian king may have only been possible by the power vacuum left in the wake of the end of the Akkadian Empire. For in southern Mesopotamia, things returned more or less to the status quo, that of individual city-states like the ones mentioned before, such as Ur, Uruk and Lagash, functioning essentially as independent countries. And if you want an example of a modern city-state, you can look no further than places such as Singapore or perhaps Monaco. But this new state that rose to prominence after the collapse of the Akkadian Empire and the expulsion of the Gutians did not suddenly appear overnight. And that is where we must go into a little more detail about our friend and restorer Ur-Nammu. For in the power vacuum left by the absence of a centralised state such as the Akkadian Empire, the city-states of southern Mesopotamia began to squabble amongst themselves for dominance of the region. Of these city-states, Ur once again rose to prominence, with Ur-Nammu striking the final decisive blow by killing the king of Lagash in battle, thereby asserting Ur's dominance over the rest of the city-states in southern Iraq, and thus began what would be later known by scholars as the Neo-Sumerian Empire under the 3rd dynasty of Ur. And for the first time in nearly a century, it seems we have a dominant player in the Mesopotamian region once more. A dominant player whose existence, funnily enough, coincides with the existence of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. And next time we shall go into how this state operated and its achievements as it sat as the dominant and perhaps only major player in the Mesopotamian region at this time. So if you enjoyed the video, perhaps consider leaving a like and maybe subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future updates concerning the history of our world and its cultures as part of the Grand Portfolio. For now though, I'm Lewis of the Grand Portfolio, and thank you for watching.